journalists unknowingly actually inflame or escalate conflicts? Those are some of the key questions that we'll hopefully get to address today with our distinguished speakers today. Starting from my left, this is Michelle Betts. I'm sure you've read all the biographies in the website. So Michelle is a media development consultant. She has been in this field for 15 years, and she's seen numerous conflict zones and been working with journalists from those various regions, including Ukraine, Rwanda, South Sudan, and the Republic of Congo. On my very right is Wojciech Tochman. He is a journalist and nonfiction writer. Some of his key strengths is post-conflict reporting and writing about trauma and those realities that sometimes the public does not necessarily see or is interested in seeing when we're talking about conflict, post-conflict realities. Wojciech has also seen some interesting locations in his work. These include Bosnia, Herzegovina, Rwanda, and Syria. To my far left is Monique Blanco. She is a producer and presenter for Radio Daria from Nicaragua. Some of the work that Monique has done has been with women empowerment and violence against women, particularly in conflict issues. And on my far right is Mr. Rauli Virtanen. Rauli is a veteran foreign, or should I say, war correspondent. I do not know of any conflict that he has not been to. These include Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Bosnia, and Vietnam. And I think we'll have a very interesting panel, so let's just dive right in. Starting off with the basics, what is conflict-sensitive reporting? Or stripping it down, what is conflict and what is conflict reporting? Michelle, I start off with you.
Sure. So conflict is actually a normal occurrence every single day. A conflict is essentially a situation where there's two or more individuals or groups of people that are trying to pursue goals or ambitions that they believe they can't share. It's as simple as that. And it happens every single day between individuals, between groups. Conflict-sensitive journalism is essentially a practice that, in my opinion, is good journalism. It's good, responsible journalism. What does that mean? Essentially, it means it's accurate, it's impartial, it's transparent, it's professional, and it's independent. Yulia actually mentioned in the introduction asking a question as to whether accuracy and ethical reporting are in conflict, and I would say that no, they're not. I think when we're talking about ethical reporting, that essentially is conflict-sensitive reporting, with accuracy and transparency being absolute key ingredients to that.
Now, without going into a long or lengthy academic assessment, can you maybe explain a little bit more how different is peace journalism as opposed to conflict-sensitive journalism, which is what we're talking about today?
Yeah, I mean, essentially there are these two schools of thought. There's those that kind of believe in conflict-sensitive reporting, as I just kind of described it, and then there are those that believe in something called peace journalism. Again, my opinion, peace journalism to me is much more of what I would call advocacy journalism, where journalists are actually knowingly and wittingly playing a role in promoting peace. I don't believe that we as journalists, I don't believe that is our role. I believe our role is to tell the stories of our communities, whether it's a conflict situation or not. Again, and that means accurately, transparently, with professionalism, ethically, independently. So I think there is a slight conflict, if you will, between conflict-sensitive journalism and peace journalism.
So advocacy, are journalists or should journalists play the role of advocate in an ongoing conflict? I'm going to go to you, Rauli. With your experience, is there such a thing, or can it be possible for a journalist covering a conflict, covering a war, to be so involved in the conflict that they unknowingly become advocates in the sense that they are pro a certain narrative or resolution to the conflict, as opposed to being completely impartial. Is that possible?
Good morning. Thank you, Julia. Just adding to the latest reply, there's a phrase that I would like to coin this conflict-sensitive journalism. But just one word: do not do any harm. That means that there's enough already participants in the conflict that are making harm to each other. So the journalists should remember: just don't harm anyone, or don't harm the peace process, or the effect of that. But regarding to your questions, we have advocacy journalism, and that is one class of part of journalism, and we will never get rid of that, and it serves for some purposes. And then we have this profession, and compared to how it was in the early 70s when I started, and since then we have been seeing many parallel developments. I always remember Martin Bell, BBC. I was with him in Sarajevo in 1992 and then onwards, and he was coining the phrase journalism of attachment, and that's also something I'm very interested in, and that's been a continuous debate about that. That doesn't mean that we can't be objective, that we have to take into consideration of the lives of the situation of the victims, and in a way make it clear in our who are shooting the civilians, and you interview the civilians who are looking for protection, etc. So you don't have to exactly point and say that these are very bad guys, these are good guys, because you can feel it, you see it in the story. That's right. The problem is nowadays when you are having this embedded system that you are following very often the military only, and that sometimes makes them to look like good guys, and then you don't have access to the other side, to the victims or the targets of bombings and cruelties and other things. So that happens in many countries, that you cover it only from the military side, the conflict.
Right. Okay, so you touched on a little bit about obviously with your experience, all the different conflicts in different areas of the world, different countries, there will be different situations that is important for a journalist to know and to do in terms of approaching and reporting on victims of conflict.
Don't harm. I think this is the first and most important point. Good morning, everybody. Usually I was as well in Sarajevo under the siege, and if you are on the one side and you cannot contact, be in touch, you cannot talk with another side, opposite side, it's very often very natural that you are, then impartiality is very, very difficult, because you are on one side and you, actually it's very clear who is a bad guy and who is not. Talking about victims, I think that usually I talk with them afterwards, after war, after conflict. We have to remember, talking about conflict-sensitive reporting, I'm not very familiar with definition and theories of journalism, but I agree that probably conflict-sensitive reporting, it means good professional journalism. I talk with the victims after the conflicts, because we have to remember, and I think that journalists sometimes don't remember about that war never ends when it ends. So war is a show, war is scenic, but post-war reality is maybe not hidden in media, but very often journalists leave survivors, victims, and leave as well also perpetrators. What's important, I don't know how to do it, means nobody taught me how to do it. I know that when I talk with victims, with survivors, the most, of course, most difficult interviews or questions are with the victims of ethnic rapes, with the women who are victims. So my first general rule is don't ask directly. I never ask directly. I just it's just kind of request at the beginning of our appointment of our meeting. Could you tell me about you at that time, as much as you want, and as much as you can, and that's all. And later I have to just listen. Mm-hmm. So this is a very sensitive domain, and but I think that the post-conflict time, it's a opportunity to all of us, all of journalists, to understand deeper the sense of conflict, the sense of violence, because during the conflict we have to report day by day the conflict, yeah. But afterwards we have more when the tension is not so high, but it's still very fresh. Trauma is very fresh. We can research. We can research the sense of conflict. We can understand how it was. We can try to understand how it was possible, how people could do it to each other.
Okay. We'll get back to the subject or the issue of post-conflict realities and assessment and how that actually influences potential future conflicts. But I want to go next to Monique. You've dealt with issues of violence and women. Can you share a little bit, just coming back from what Wojciech was saying, sometimes journalists and maybe the public is not sensitive enough to the issue of how to deal with violence and reporting and when it relates to women, because women are often victims in conflict and war and just simply forgotten.
Yes, thank you so much. It's exactly what happens when you live in a system that is hard not only for women, but for everyone. And I want to share to you the situation in Nicaragua, because we don't live in a war, we don't have a war, but the situation is still difficult. What is the situation in Nicaragua? Well, we live in a dictatorship, and it's very hard because in this kind of governments, in this kind of places, the regime of our president, Daniel Ortega, it affects not only women, but also men, also children, youth, and we have to cover that. We have to try to make the world know the situation in our country, in a place where the First Lady is also the Vice President, in a place where the children of the President and the Vice President, they are the presidential assessors, in a place also where they control all the media. The situation is really difficult, and you have the power to evidence what is happening there. I tried to write a little to share to you, and I'm going to read it very fast because it is all related. It is all related, and we have to know the situation with projects. We have to know the situation with the constantly change of the laws in Nicaragua. For women, we have laws that they change it every year. We also have projects that affects the people, the families, the women. We have a project in Nicaragua, for example, the Interoceanic Canal, and we have mom protesting because they can lose their houses, they can love the places where they live. And in countries like this, media has an important roles because we cannot expect that the official media outlets that are in Nicaragua, that are controlled by the government, can express what's happening there. Only the few and the small independent media that exist in Nicaragua, that are like 2 television channels and a few radio stations, that's all we have in Nicaragua. And the rest is controlled by the government.
Monique, sorry, don't mean to cut you off, but in that kind of situation, can you maybe share just a little bit with us, how does a journalist cover accurately in a situation where it's like your country?
It's hard because we don't have access to the public information. It's hard because as a media, you can resist, you cannot resist the economy. You don't have access to publicity. So it's very difficult, a media in Nicaragua, to survive. It's very difficult, but you try to do it using the digital spaces, by social media, by a web page, and trying sometimes to protect the identity of the victim.
Okay, thank you. So you touched on digital media. That's going to be one of our subjects later, how that actually affects conflict reporting. I want to go to Michelle now. We mentioned or touched on the subject of post-conflict realities that Wojciech was talking about. In your assessment, in the anatomy of a conflict, why is it so important for a journalist to still cover post-conflict realities? How will this actually affect new conflicts? Is there, I don't know, some sort of early warnings or lessons that shouldn't be ignored there?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that I neglected to mention in answering your first question with regards to what is conflict-sensitive journalism or conflict-sensitive reporting is the fact that I believe that journalists also need to understand what is a conflict? What is the conflict cycle? What are, the processes and the phases involved in a conflict? And I think those are absolutely critical for journalists to understand if they are going to cover any kind of conflict. And this goes directly to what Wojciech was saying earlier about, war doesn't end. Conflict really is a cycle. Things will often simmer underneath the surface, and then things will escalate, they'll escalate more, and then finally a conflict may, or may not in some cases, become violent. The conflict remains violent for a while, and then, hopefully you'll start the de-escalation process, and then reconciliation, and then you're kind of in this post-conflict zone. And I think what we need to remember is that this post-conflict area, zone, phase, is very easily disturbed again. And things can ignite very, very quickly and escalate once again into this kind of violent phase. And I think that's why we do need to pay attention to post-conflict situations, why we do need to focus on reconciliation, we need to focus on peace process, we need to focus on elections as well, particularly, I would argue, in post-conflict or in immediate post-conflict areas, because elections are, in any society, elections often are a flashpoint. And in post-conflict areas, elections are even more of a flashpoint, and things can really kind of get out of control and get violent again. I just wanted to add one more thing just about conflict, and that is that not all conflicts are violent. I think we are assuming, perhaps, except it maybe in Nicaragua, maybe it's not really a violent conflict right now. I think it was in the past, and who knows, maybe you're still kind of in post-conflict dictatorship today or authoritarian, but that things could change very easily. And so I think we also need to understand that conflict is not always violent, but for the most part, what we're talking about up here is, in fact, violent conflict.
Can you elaborate a little bit? When you say the conflict is not always violent, people presumably always assume, oh, it's war, it's conflict, like the things that we see on television or gets reported by the major news media outlet. But we're talking about other things that are now non-violent, non-physical conflict, yes? hate speech? How does a journalist report on hate speech without actually contributing to potentially fueling a new conflict?
You know, I think this comes down to real basic ethical questions. I think journalists, we need to ask, and I am a former journalist, we need to ask ourselves, you know, why am I covering this story? Why am I covering it this way? Why am I using the words I'm using? Why am I using the pictures and or video that I'm using? Why am I choosing, as a broadcaster, the clips that I'm using as opposed to something else? Am I taking it out of context? Am I hurting somebody? Am I harming somebody? This goes back to the do no harm principle, which is, I think, critical in our work. You know, so I think we need to have these checklists of very basic kind of ethical questions, asking yourself, what is my motivation for every step along the way of my coverage? Why am I choosing to cover this story over here and not this one, for example?
Speaking of checklists, Rauli, so there's so many things that a journalist or news organization must consider in covering conflict. How do you do that in today's media landscape compared to, say, when you first started out covering the Vietnam? I'm assuming that the golden era of conflict reporting is over.
Well, I fully agree with you. That's not only because I had my golden era of working in the 70s and 80s, but definitely, I mean, of course, many things are better today. I mean, or let's say, we have more information than ever, but we know less than before about the world. But that there's so much information, but everything is better. And let's not talk about we all know about this problems we're facing today. Just to remind you, like I started in the 70s, went to Vietnam in 72, 75, to Cambodia, then Cyprus War, and then Lebanon Civil War, etc. That time, the media houses, the publishing houses, they had the resources, which means they had the money. Even countries like Finland, even small newspapers where I started in Lahti, we had a foreign desk, we had 4 or 5 different specialists in different areas. I was writing for the local farmers about Juan Velasco Alvarado's military coup in Peru. How does it impact in Finland? I must say, sometimes we went to the other extreme, like with the Swedish press. Once they published my story from New Caledonia, there was an uprising on 5 columns on the front page, but the Swedes were even more international.
How many columns? 5 columns on the front page?
Yeah,
that doesn't happen today.
Than us. But the more important thing, I mean, now of course everyone is complaining about the resources. I think it's a question of values. Do you value foreign reporting or not? I mean, the media has budget restrictions, but they could have less sports, less entertainment, etc. But this is, again, a question of each of us, of values. But I think even the most important thing is that time we had time. We had time to prepare our stories, we had time to go to the field, time to talk to people, time to get genuine interviews, and we were not rushed by deadlines. Nowadays, you send a foreign reporter, correspondent somewhere, she goes to the place, he goes to the place, go to the hotel roof, puts a flak jacket on, puts the helmet on, he looks good, and then from the capital where he or she comes from, they tell what's happening in the country you are there. Just tell it us very shortly on TV, on live, and it looks good. I mean, and this poor reporter never has time to leave the hotel because the next deadline is after 1 hour, or he or he has to do the radio, etc. And the other good advantage that time, we were able to do long stories, even on places like Peru or Rhodesia, whatever, and they both in a print and in radio, etc. So those were the basic good things. And what else did I? Then one good thing was it was less dangerous than today. I mean, of course, many colleagues died in Vietnam, but it's nothing compared to Syria, where I had my last trip in 2013, and then suddenly met Al-Nusra, the terrorist organization there, but luckily got away, and then since then, no sensible journalist has gone to North Syria, especially knowing what happened to James Foley and the others. So this whole thing was that the press, we had a red press card issued by the Federal Journalist Union from Prague, Czechoslovakia. We showed the card, and it aroused a lot of respect. Same time, people were respecting Red Cross, NGOs, wherever we showed the flag. Sometimes in Nicaragua, we just put a towel on the antenna of our car when we were crossing from Somoza troops to the Sandinistas, etc. So this kidnapping became, actually started only in the 80s in Lebanon when Terry Anderson was kidnapped, etc. And then we've been going downhill regarding the safety. And one more thing about, we were quite free, like we know the lessons in Vietnam. There was no censorship in that sense that the Americans were able to see their own boys, sons, and fathers being killed or wounded. And of course, the Americans learned their lessons then, and then we started to get this censorship in Grenada in 1983, invasion in Grenada and Gulf War, etc. So we were more free, we had more time, we had more resources. Only problem was we had to struggle sending stories by telex, finding a telex machine, and sometimes my main office with Helsinki would say that this satellite feed is very expensive. It's $10,000, so the story is not so good. But
yes,
yeah.
yes. I'd like to ask Wojciech and Monique. So, based on what Rauli was saying, does that mean it's that impossible or improbable to produce quality journalism in today's situation?
I believe. It's okay.
Try this one, yeah.
Maybe this one. I believe it's still possible, but of course you are right that the long stories. Actually, if you want to describe real, if you want to do it well, you need more time and more space in the newspaper. So actually, the long stories written by reporters are never. They don't exist. They don't exist in the newspapers now. They are in the books, yeah? And we still write the books about the world and about the conflicts. But, I would like to say just one observation from Zaatari camp in northern Jordan when I used to work a few years ago at the refugee camps, Syrian refugee camps. So when we are talking about, for instance, Srebrenica, it was 1995 in Bosnia, we can say that we have just a few videos, just a few clips, and we can watch what happened over there. But when we are talking about war in Syria, when I used to talk with people in Zaatari camp, actually everybody who escaped from Syria to Jordan had in his cell phone or her cell phone recorded death of their relatives. So we have plenty of these short films, short movies, and it was very common, very often that somebody used to ask me, would you like to watch the death of my son? So coming to our first, or one of the first questions, we have to, first of all, we have to, as a journalist, we have to understand the nature of conflict and nature of violence. Because if you if you get some question, would you like to see the death of my son? Or would you like to talk with my raped daughter? How we should answer, how we should behave. So this is a crucial, I think, point to understand the nature, the essence of violence, because then you can react in the proper way. And what does it mean proper way? I think that what I said, we should never ask directly if we talk with the victims. We should request them to tell us about what happened. But I think that you said about it, time is very important. We have to have time to talk with people. If we don't have time, they actually understand that it's very visible that we don't respect their experiences, their trauma, and actually our goal, it's just to have a short, very spectacular very spectacular piece in newspaper. But I think that the good professional journalism is possible, but this is much more difficult than before. But if we have time and if we have knowledge about this conflict, and if we really wonder and we really think what's the nature of conflict, essence of violence, we still can do the good journalism. But the question is if the owners of media want our good journalism. It's another story.
I think that's a parallel session 15 somewhere, the media ownership. But some very good points. We're going to go back into the nature of conflict. I want to go to Monique. What's your take on this? Is it still possible to do good quality reporting when you're facing with such deadlines? Especially, you mentioned earlier, we're now pushing into the digital age where everything is so ferociously fast. What's your thoughts on that?
It's hard. It's hard to try to do good work because time is something that plays against us always, all the time. Some people, some media thinks that they have to present the information at being the first, but that not always allows you to do a great work, to verify the facts. Sometimes trying to do it as quickly as possible is not good precisely about what he was saying. You have to respect the people, you have to respect the story, and you have to understand it to present it well. Also, I don't have much experience as the people in this panel, but I think right now is a great opportunity to use all the social media. It's a great opportunity to post the reports on the web pages. But if you're gonna do it that way, you have to do it well. You have to respect the times. You have to respect the people, and you have always to be conscious that once you post it, once you put it there, it will never erase.
Yeah, gone are the days where it's yesterday's news. No, it's forever and ever there now. Michelle, going to you. Why must journalists always think about nature of conflict? Wojciech was mentioning that. Can you talk a little bit about how the importance of knowing the context and the nature, the typology of conflict, and how does that actually affect a journalist's reporting of an ongoing conflict?
Yeah, I mean, I think this kind of goes back to also thinking about the roles that the media play in covering conflict and in covering the conflict process. I think this is something else that should be a part of conflict-sensitive reporting is simply that understanding of the different roles that we may play, be it gatekeeper of information, be it motivator of something. Sometimes the media are used as a channel of communication between, two warring parties or two parties in conflict. So I think we simply need to understand the various different roles that the media can play. We also serve as simply analyzing. We serve as an analyst of the conflict, particularly in the days when we had time and space to do that. I think we're seeing less and less of that. because of the nature of the news media today. I think the media also can play the role of educator, which is similar to that of kind of conflict analysis. I think we do need to educate. We need to remember that we, as journalists, are there to serve the public. We are a public service, and I think we need to kind of go back to that and remember that that is our role in our communities. We are serving the public, and the public is our immediate community. We need to find out what their concerns are, how does the conflict affect them, what is this conflict really about? So there are a number of different roles that the media do play, and I think that should be a part of conflict-sensitive journalism.
When we're talking about context, so the context of a conflict, so we're talking about, is it an election conflict? Mm-hmm. Is it a ethnic cleansing conflict like we saw in the Balkans? Why should a journalist care which type of conflict he or she is reporting? How will that affect his or her reporting?
I think what has happened is that many journalists and the nature of news, if it bleeds, it leads, and I think we have a tendency to simplify. And it's easiest to say that this person is against this person or this group is against this, instead of really delving in and trying to understand the complexities of every single conflict that is out there. Conflict is complex. Conflict is not something simple. And if we don't try to understand what the complexities involved are, we're not doing our job. We need to understand. We need to understand who the players are, all the players, not just A and B, but also C, D, E, F, G. So I think we need to go kind of just beyond, the good, as we said earlier on, the good guy and the bad guy. It's much, much more complex than that, and we need to understand the complexities. We need to understand the causes of conflict. It's not usually just one thing. You take the case of Lebanon, for example. Back in the day during the Civil War, then many people would say, well, the Lebanon War is because of the various factions in the communities in the Lebanese community. Other analysts would say it was religious, others would say it was economic, and in fact, if you really delve into it and question and analyze and look at the conflict, it's really all of those things and more. So I think when we as journalists are covering any kind of conflict, we must absolutely do that analysis, try and understand the causes of the conflict, and it's not usually just one thing.
Rauli, when you're on the ground and in a conflict or a war situation, sometimes you're embedded with one side. Can journalists actually do that? Have the time, have the luxury to give thoughtful, comprehensive analysis when you're actually maybe assigned by your assignment editor, no, you stick with this faction. How do you always consider how impartial or how balanced I am in my reporting? Is that possible?
If you have the luxury, or your publishing house has the luxury, then of course you have a reporter also on the other side, or you gather the information through news agencies or media that covers it from the other side. But of course, like in Syria, it's very difficult to get objective, neutral reporting from the Daesh, or what you call it, IS side, and also the Syrian government is controlling very much what you report from there. So that's the thing, that the more sides, but like one-sided reporting is always bad. And I remember during the previous Iraq war, when reporters were embedded with the U.S. troops, they were quite disappointed, especially non-American reporters. We had some from Finland that they were not getting really at all near the action, actually, what they were looking for, so were held in the back, and at the same time there was no report from the other side. But some things, just observations, going back to when we were talking about Balkans and Lebanon and etc. The worst things that media has been guilty is going in demonizing, the other side. I mean, we have a great example from Rwanda before the the genocide there on the radio broadcasting, and I also saw it very clearly in former Yugoslavia. I mean, that's where, like Michel said, all the complicities come in: the religion, the ethnicity, etc. And it was a big mess, and it was also all from the different religions that the leaders were really demonizing others. I had people in Belgrade telling me that when you go to Sarajevo, go and look at the zoo. That's where the Muslims are throwing the Serbs to the lions to be eaten, and people really believe that in Serbia. So that was something extreme, and that's why we need to have this post. The problem is that we don't cover too much. I mean, what's happening after the war because of the role of the media. We leave the scene, and then very few stories you hear. Like I've been following some youngsters I met in Bosnia. They were helping me in '92, and I still keep in touch with them, and I'll see them at the end of the month. And same time, we should do a story about the lost generation of Syrians. I mean, of children, teenagers who never went to school, and what will happen in the future to understand something more about radicalism, etc. So just these points.
You want to elaborate on this subject?
I just wanted to add that people, for instance, in my country, part of us in Poland, still believe that, for instance, refugees. As you know, we have a huge refugees crisis in Europe. Will eat us. So this is actually should be, I think, very good question for our today panel about conflict-sensitive reporting, because refugee crisis is as well conflict, yeah, and journalists are very, very involved in this issue, and part of us actually are the servant of right-wing regimes in European Union countries, like in Hungary or in my country in Poland. So every day in the public channel TV, which is taken by government, they serve us horrible stories about refugees who commit crime in Western Europe, and poor Western Europe is not able to do something with that. So it's a very huge challenge for us who understand the problem, I think, to educate, yeah, to educate. So every time, every day, on Facebook, in our newspapers, in our TV, which the radio stations, we are not taken by government. Still, we have free journalism. We have to educate, and actually, I have to say that the refugee crisis in Europe is actually very well covered by Polish journalists who understand the sense of this problem, because we are everywhere. We are in the Greek islands. We were in Calais, in a jungle, in the refugee camp in Calais, in northern France. We were in Germany. We are everywhere, yeah, because we try to tell our readers, our viewers, that actually we first of all we have to help these people, and later we can wonder what we should do together. But sometimes I think that it's a wall. It's because, for instance, the horrible example. I had a meeting with teachers in Poland, and I asked them, if you see somebody who is sinking in the sea, should you give him or her a hand? What was the answer of one of the teachers? It depends. It depends. So it's as I told you, it's a huge challenge, and I wanted to tell you about this issue, because this is actually very present and very important.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on that a little bit. Maybe you can add, but just to put it out there before going to Monique, to Michelle first. So I would understand that it would be easier for an international or foreign correspondent to come to a location, cover the conflict, and be more or less emotionally invested in the conflict. But if you're a local journalist covering a conflict within your own country or your own regency, your own village, how do you prevent, or how do you, make sure that you're not emotionally invested in such a way that it compromises? I mean, we were always talking about conflict reporting, but it's always about international conflicts. These are the rules, these are the guidelines. But what about local reporters? Foreign correspondents come in, they leave, more or less. But a local journalist, they face a whole set of different challenges, right? How do you make sure that you're still sensitive in your conflict reporting, Michelle?
Yeah, before I get to, sorry, I keep forgetting about that.
Things to address.
Yeah, sorry. Before we get to that, I just want to add one important point that I think is important anyways, and that is that conflict is normal when there's change. And so what's going on in Europe with the refugee crisis is change. That is conflict. And if the conflict is not managed, then it is likely to become violent. And I think that's why the issue of media serving as kind of an early warning system to the possibility of violent conflict is extremely important. We need to pay attention to conflict even before it's violent. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And then with regards to local journalists, yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I tend to do, is work with local journalists who are covering their country's conflict or post-conflict situation. And I think in addition to some of the challenges that Rauli and Wojciech and Monique mentioned, is that there is not just kind of the safety issues for many of these journalists. I worked with a bunch of women in Central African Republic, and many of these women had to flee. Their houses were destroyed. They were living in IDP camps at the airport in the capital city. So not only are they kind of dealing with that as their reality, but they're also still trying to do their jobs as journalists. And they're dealing with kind of a structural environment as well as the kind of socio-political environment and their own personal environment. So you've got all of these different factors that are involved and that are affecting, that have the possibility to affect their reporting. So, we need to think about those different things, and I think as journalists, local journalists covering their own conflicts, I think they need to be even more aware that, and I think they are, most of them, I think they understand the realities of the conflict and, that they are living every single day. But I think for those of the internationals especially that tend to work with local journalists, particularly today in Syria, because that's really the only way we're getting news out, internationals are no longer going in, we need to think about the structural environment in which these guys are working. They don't have the resources that the internationals have. When you're talking about safety issues, we're talking about a lack of real basic equipment, such as helmets that fit, flak jackets that fit, gear that that is going to protect them. You're also talking about access to usually fairly basic information. There's often lack of forthcoming information from military and from government officials. I think that could be addressed as well. It's a whole other thing. I think we need to also recognize the constraints, be it on the regulatory side, the legislative side, but also who is owning who is owning and managing the news outlets that these journalists are working for, and how does that that whole gatekeeper role, how is that affecting how conflict A or conflict B is being covered. So I think there's a whole range of factors, and I'll tell you, I have so much respect for the journalists that I have worked with in Ukraine, in Central African Republic, in Rwanda, in the DR, name your conflict. And they want to be responsible. So they are up so much. And anybody in the room that's, a media or that works with those journalists, there's work that I think could be done and needs.
I'm going to open up a question soon, but going to Monique first. What's it like working there with conflict, and how do you deal with all the issues the other panelists have raised?
I'm agree. Okay, I'm agree with Michelle. Definitely, we have to clarify different kinds of conflicts. In Nicaragua, as she said, we are not in a violent environment, but if we don't do nothing, we might be in that situation. Nobody wants that situation. It's very important to what is happening right now with the things about the and we let the big governments to keep all the media in countries like Nicaragua. What is going to happen with the people in there? Who is going to raise the voice for them? But you all also have to do it in a don't pro
If you have questions for any of the panelists, yes, the lady in the middle first. Can we have the? Okay. Sorry, can you just give your name and?
Okay. My name is Voni. I'm from Timor-Leste. I'm a journalist. My first question to Michelle from related to our situation in Timor-Leste. In the past, we have a lot of women to be victims surrounded by the how to call it, they gathered sexual abuse from. But during the Indonesian occupation, the lot of media not really covered the story. But now, in my position, I focus on the gender and women issues, sexual. Between Indonesian and Timor-Leste. So that's our challenges, how to cover about related to the conflict sensitive reporting. So you need to make a change, media to advocate our government, our women, to empower women to access to justice, you know. So in your experience, how to, do you have like alternative media, not mainstreaming media, to cover that point? It's very important issue, how to empower women and youth related to your situation, because it is terrible. Media is a part of how to advocate. Okay, and then to Michelle, related to our situation or the another situation, report, sensitive reporting related to our situation, like especially to the policy of our mechanism of governments and how to, you know, how to promote the justice. A lot of humans and youths become victims in the war. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just go. necessarily, or you're not able to report in the mainstream media, yes, because maybe there are constraints from government. She was asking, do you have examples or stories about alternative media outlets or ways to report these without using the, mainstream media in your country?
Covering this kind of stories in Nicaragua, it's sometimes really hard because besides you give the story, the government gives another version. So also you present the victims, but always protecting them. But you present what is happening there, but the government, they have the mass media in our country, so they present the other story, or they name it different. So it's hard to cover this kind of stories because it's like one position against other position. Also, you have the statistics, and the government presents another statistics. So that's...
Yeah, is there a way that we can, still report these without having to, use the normal, or sorry, not normal, the mainstream conservative media outlets? You mentioned digital. Is there more room now to explore these stories on social media, maybe?
Yes, the problem is that you can use social media, you can use web page in Nicaragua, but not all the people in Nicaragua has access to the internet. So how do you say, el alcance? The penetration of your information is not efficient because you have a limited audience, and in places like Nicaragua, you need to inform people. But if you only have, I repeat, like 2 independent channels and a few radio, and the access to the internet is limited in our country, so it's very difficult to inform a whole about the
to contribute to this conversation. When we're talking about traumatic events, like in the case of Timor-Leste, how important is it to to continue telling that story? Where do we place forgiveness and reconciliation?
I think that this is very important, and usually we think that victims, the survivors, don't want to talk with us. It's not true. Very often, especially after a time must go on, and then people are ready to give testimonies. And very often, journalist is the first person in her or his life after trauma who is ready to talk about it. So, experience in Rwanda. To talk about it, because first they were not ready, but when they started to be ready, the people around her were not ready. So I think this is important because we have to, first of all, we have to research it and to write about it, to repeating. perpetrators, genociders, they always
If colleagues from Indonesia would like to answer in Indonesia, I'll translate. Any other questions? Any other questions? No questions. All clear. All clear. All agreed. Okay. Gentleman on the right. Gentleman on the right. Mic-nya tolong. Mic-nya tolong.
Michelle, very brief. Is it possible for journalists still use cover both sides mechanism on conflict reporting and Monique? Actually, I'm a radio streamer. I'm blessed because I'm meeting the radio people from Nicaragua. So what kind of or approach do you use in help women who became victim of conflict? Thank you.
I'm going to take issue with your question, phrase it, sorry, and that is possible to cover both sides. What I'm going to say is that there's usually more than just two sides. I think it is our job as journalists. It is our role to cover all sides of a conflict. Is it easy to do? Absolutely. It is not fraught. It is difficult, various challenges. We are threatened. With our lives. With our lives. Journalists have many lose their lives. But I do think that if we do our jobs as a public servant, we absolutely cover sides of a conflict.
In Nicaragua, in a very small radio station. So for us, it's very easy to have alliances with some organizations for women. We have to cover a situation. We dedicate radio in the radio for programs. We have a small capsules, spaces about empower women. We talk about violence in the workplace. We talk violence in violence. We talk about violence in a relationship. But also having the alliance to women organization allow us to covering the story, recommend it to the organization. Not only taking the history of the woman, but also helping her so she can relieve her problem. Does that answer your question? Any other questions from the floor? We still have 15 minutes.
The lady in the middle. Or who's actually leading?
The last lady. Sorry, I didn't see you.
Thanks for the chance. My name is Asai. I'm quite interested with women that as a journalist we have to focus on the peace operations of the consolidation of the conflict. But the other side, the journalists also have to deliver the message, the full of truth. Sometimes everybody. So maybe when we're trying to deliver the truth to the people, it will work conflict areas. So I'm just wondering what you think how you deal with this. Thank you.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Truth hurts. The truth sometimes kills. And I think this goes back to the ethical consideration of what we do as journalists. I think we are covering a conflict if we believe that there is that possibility that this story or truth or will create more harm. I think we have to return to that. We have to ask ethical questions. Why are we covering? Why are we covering? Why are we covering? And why are we covering it perhaps from this point of view? Why are we speaking to these people and not these people? I think there's all of these questions of self-reflection. Do no harm. That is a good principle to live by.
Rally, I'd like to
Actually, the challenge is that are we going to raise hopes of hope that are groundless and affect them psychologically? I always remember in Sorry left our friends, the people we interview them that next time we come back, there will be peace here. And then we go back and then you go back to the few weeks and we are liars and we are so we have to judge that we need to hope the same way when they go same way when they go or not get hope or to get should we be realistic and we tell them for the worst instead of come next time we'll come next time
It's a question of people that he or she covers, where sometimes like you say, or it's okay, things will be fine, things will be fine, be over. But I think the young lady was asking, have you personally been in a situation where you know of a certain fact,
disappeared and then they stayed in there, etc. And if you story, so then now you show them that can you find someone who is supporting, just supporting people, etc. You need to balance the story. This is an example. Otherwise not. Well, another thing is in West Beirut, in West bombing in August 82. I was in bomb shelters and reporting on the civilians' fate. And then the Israeli ambassador in Helsinki called my editor-in-chief and said that this is not very subjective reporting. But my editor-in-chief is witnessing there about the cost of this bombing. So then you cannot voice the opinion of the Israeli embassy or Israeli embassy.
I think also just to add to your question, because whose truth and how do you interpret that? When a journalist or maybe your editor in the newsroom says, "Oh, we can't do that because it will cause harm." Which perspective are you basing that on? I think that's a very complex issue, to answer. Do you want to pitch in on that?
Truth is the first casualty in the war.
Yeah, absolutely. It is incredibly complex. Covering whether you're a local journalist covering your own conflict or international flying in. Yeah, it's complex. And yes, and whose truth? Personally, I prefer the term
question, please. How far the journalists, the government and the international society give the protection to journalists? This is for the all speaker. This, the last question. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yep.
Sorry. Well, for your last question, so maksudnya untuk
the government or international society give the protection to the journalists in reporting the kind of issue.
Okay. You know, I think there are many aspects of peace journalism. I actually took Jake Lynch's course, like, whoa, I don't know how many years ago, a long time ago. And there are aspects of it that I absolutely agree with. And I do agree. This goes back to the point where I said, you know, we should be gathering all aspects, all sides, all, you know, as many voices as we can of the conflict, including the victims, including the civilians. And so that to me is not peace journalism. That to me is solid professional journalism. That is what we should be doing every single day. And, you know, I think my issue, if you will, with peace journalism is simply that it really does kind of put journalists in the position of being advocates of something. And that, as a journalist, I feel uncomfortable with. I'm very comfortable with speaking to civilians, with victims, with soldiers, with government, with, you know, whoever. Throw them at me, I'll ask them questions. But to advocate for something, that's where I do have an issue.
The second part is how far has governments and international society given protection to journalists in the case of conflict reporting?
Yeah.
Boy, that's a big question. That could be like, it's a whole other panel. But
You can speak on the legal.
Yeah, look, I think there are a number of issues with regards to safety, and I think it depends on the context and it depends on the country. And I think, you know, UNESCO has the UN Action Plan on Safety, and I think that has made strides. That has also brought attention to the issue of the safety of journalists and the issue of impunity. I think there are many governments around the world that are taking this issue of national security and coming up with legislation that affects freedom of the press and access to information in a negative way. So I think, look, there's so much work to be done when it comes to protection of journalists. We are targets. This is something I say in almost any workshop, anytime I'm working with journalists in conflict zones. It's not even just conflict zones anymore. We are targets. We as journalists are targets. And I think the only way that I think that we can, one important aspect of protecting ourselves is ensuring that we cover the stories that we do responsibly and ethically. And I think we do need to have conversations, whether it's the unions or journalist associations, with governments, with international donors, international media developers, whoever, you know, figure out who the different actors are and have this conversation with them. If there is a safety problem pertaining to journalists in country X, be it maybe Indonesia or Nigeria, that needs to be addressed, and it should be talked about.
The other want to pitch in on this? I mean, I think in our earlier conversation, you mentioned about how more dangerous it is now for journalists to cover conflict because the nature of the conflict itself is now so changed.
Yeah, definitely, and we don't have answers now. I mean, of course, we have courses for journalists who go to the conflict areas, but still there's no less and less respect, and this doesn't only deal with the journalists, it deals with the NGOs. If you have a Red Cross flag or a United Nations flag, whatever you are, we are targets there at the moment, and so far no answer there. I wanted to have another actually a question to UNESCO. I mean, would UNESCO be willing to finance foreign reporting at this time when the publishing houses all over the world are cutting down the foreign reporting and foreign correspondence? My friend Edward Girardet, who is working with the Afghanistan-related issues, was playing with the idea that maybe UN would establish a fund that gives money to foreign reporters, foreign correspondents. That would be a wonderful thing. And because now I'll finish what I was about to say, this whole refugee thing is exposing the main problem, that we don't have permanent foreign correspondents in those areas. For example, in case of Finland and Poland, whatever, people were wondering who are these people. I mean, they are well dressed, they have iPhones, and are they really refugees? So that means that we didn't cover the daily life of those people in the Middle East, in Africa. We only go there when there's a flash breaking news, something violent happening, and people get an idea that these people are just killing each other there, and then they are very dangerous people. We don't want to see them. I mean, before, in the golden times, we had permanent correspondents there who were to the local wedding, who were describing how the people live, and we felt them more closer than today. I mean, we have more information today than ever before, but we know less about those people, how an Iraqi university professor, how he lives and why he's fleeing. I mean, he's well dressed, he looks good, but he's leaving because of the fear of being, or his family being killed. So it's very important now. I'm mostly worried about the status of foreign reporting in all over in the world, not only in our countries. But
yep. Any other question? Yes. Sorry. Could I ask the gentleman in the front? Just okay. You and then you.
Terima kasih.
Monggo, Mbak.
Di daerah saya ada masalah soal buruh migran. Data ilegal, data yang kami peroleh ada sebanyak 7.000 orang TKI ilegal berada di Timur Tengah. Itu ada di Riyadh, ada di Qatar, dan lain-lain. Kasus terakhir yang terjadi di daerah saya di Lombok, Nusa Tenggara Barat, itu ada kasus dugaan perdagangan organ. Dan ini telah banyak dialami oleh TKI-TKW yang ada di Lombok. Tapi kasus ini tidak pernah bisa terungkap. Dari tahun 2005 yang kami peroleh kasus dugaan perdagangan organ yang diduga dilakukan di Malaysia, kemudian di Timur Tengah, dan terakhir ada dugaan penukaran organ tubuh, ginjal Rabita. Ada kasus TKW bernama Rabita asal Lombok Utara. Diduga ginjalnya ditukar oleh pihak lain, dan itu operasi dilakukan di Qatar. Saya mau bertanya, untuk mengungkap ini kami kesulitan di daerah maupun di nasional karena tidak ada ruang di media kami.
Maaf Mbak, karena tema besarnya tentang meliput di daerah perang dan konflik, kira-kira yang ingin dikaitkan dengan kasus ini bagaimana Mbak?
Ini akan berhubungan dengan konflik antar negara, Indonesia dan Timur Tengah. Jika kasus ini terbongkar, ini akan ada masalah antar dua negara itu, meskipun ini masalah kecil yang dianggap oleh banyak orang. Tapi ini masalah kemanusiaan yang mungkin akan menimbulkan konflik antar kedua negara itu, karena hubungan antar dua negara ini saat ini tidak ada masalah. Dengan adanya masalah ini akan ada konflik. Nah, bagaimana caranya kemudian masalah ini, informasi ini bisa diangkat oleh media?
Saya sudah dapat ini ya. I'm already flagged by the organizers, but I want to ask your indulgence for an extension of 10 minutes. The gentleman in the second row, your question?
Hi, I'm Leon Morse with IREX, and I just wanted to carry over a question that came up in the plenary session on investigative reporting, and that is the respect for the local laws. And if you are reporting in the conflict area, and I'm not talking about laws that are meant to protect people, but I'm talking about if a military authority says a certain city is off limits, but there's a story there, do you still go? And if you do, does that compromise your objectivity?
I'm assuming it's, okay. No. Okay, thank you. The question that the lady asked, so this is, this is a bit offside-ish, but it can be connected to the phases of conflict, okay? So basically she's discussing about alleged organ trade that's allegedly happening, that's involving Indonesian migrant workers in the Middle East. Her question is this: because this subject or this story is not being reported, or rather this story is, in her opinion, not being reported enough or not getting enough exposure in the media because it can potentially harm Indonesian relations with countries in the Middle East, particularly Saudi Arabia. Now, I'm placing it in the context of phases of conflict. If this does not get reported now, can it potentially develop into a conflict because it is simmering, actually? What's your take on that?
Yeah, that is a tough question. I completely understand the challenges, and it doesn't, we need to ask ourselves, as we said, are we doing more harm? But I think in this case, it's exactly as Julia is suggesting, I think, in that it is definitely a story worth reporting, and I think it is also an element of early warning. It does suggest that there is conflict there. That is a conflict story. That is a story of conflict. Is it violent conflict? Well, they could probably even argue that it is essentially violent conflict if they're, taking people's body parts. So I think it is a story worthy of coverage. And yes, it does definitely go to the phases or the phases of conflict or the conflict cycle. And I think it is an important aspect to cover if you consider the early warning phase of conflict and the media's role in reporting those stories and highlighting issues that may shine a light on a potential upscaling of conflict.
We're going to go to the gentleman's question about, how should a journalist deal with, local or national laws that may get in the way of his or her reporting. Do you want to take that? How do you, anticipate or deal with that?
Yeah, it depends. You have to calculate the risk. If you think the story is good, is it worth that? After you get there, you manage to get the story out, then you will be kicked out of the country, whatever. So I've been trying my luck a few times in Gwangju in 1980, the South Korean Tiananmen Square. I managed to get through the South Korean army patrols only because I was with Eddie Adams, who was a famous Vietnam War photographer and who told the Korean soldiers that you were young boys here when I brought you chewing gum during the Korean War, so that helped and things like that. But like in the Gulf War, when we were controlled by Norman Schwarzkopf and his staff, I mean, we didn't take any risk when we were in Saudi Arabia because we knew that we'll be kicked out and we never get to Kuwait. So the moment we crossed the border into Kuwait, there was no more control anymore, and then we could go everywhere. And there are ways to go around this, but you always take a risk that next time you are not welcome anymore to that country, or they send you home, and then your boss will be angry at why did you violate the rules that now we don't have anyone there. So it really depends how important, how you evaluate the stories. Is it worth of basically risking your own safety, or then the continue reporting there, or in worst case, your agency or newspaper can be banned to come there.
Did you want to add something?
If you write a long story, and if you have a time and not very small budget, you can play a game. So first, a few times you are going with tourist visa, and you can. Believe that they will not Google you. And sometimes I was successful with this game. And later on, when I wanted to talk with officials, for instance, in Rwanda, to go to prisons to talk with perpetrators, so I had to be officially over there, then I applied for a journalist visa, but actually most of my research was done already.
Kids, don't try that at home. Yes.
I just want to add one important point to that, and that is I do believe that local journalists covering their own countries or their own communities' conflict, they live there. They can't easily just escape and move somewhere else. And so their level of risk, I think, is much more, it's much higher, essentially. And also, I think that every individual has a different kind of comfort level with the amount of risk they are willing to take. So there's the individual thing, but I think we also have to give serious consideration to local journalists and understand the challenges that they face in covering their community's conflicts.
Did you want to add, Monique?
Yeah, the worst thing is that you are putting your your stringer or fixer in danger. You are leaving the country, and very often I felt shame for the big Anglo-American agencies, papers, the way they treat their fixers. I mean, like if you are a correspondent in Baghdad, a Western guy, you send the local Iraqis to cover the worst the battles there, and they don't get their name in the byline, and many of the fixers, they don't have insurance, and they are there constantly every day, while a visiting foreign correspondent is risking his or her life maybe during 1 week and then goes away, and that's a problem. And of course same applies even to taxi drivers. I remember in Beirut, I mean, when you had to cross the green line, there were the Armenians were the only ones who were able to do that. So visiting correspondent comes there and says, take me near to the bang bang, and then he survives and then flies home next day. There comes next correspondent. So basically this taxi driver is being pushed in order to get the money for his big family to face the battle line almost every day in his life, and none of us are paying his insurance, or we don't care if he gets killed, or we don't participate in a funeral. We just forget them. So that's a shameful thing.
Right. Okay, we literally have 30 seconds and we're all freezing up there. I'm going to let one more gentleman, quick question, and it has to be conflict-sensitive reporting related.
Thank you. My name is Wisnu from Salatiga, Indonesia. I would like to raise a case happened in Indonesia in the election 2014, and I believe that this will also happen in 2019, 2 years next. And that time in 2014, during the presidential election, people in Indonesia and also media were polarized. Yeah, I know. At that time, Jakarta Post, this is one of English edition of Indonesian media, openly declared that this media support one candidate because this candidate tend to be was covered badly in mainstream media. My question is, what's your opinions about this open positions, stance of the Jakarta Post? Thank you.
Makasih, Pak. Like 30 seconds, Michelle.
Yep, I'll make it quick. You know, this is, I think it's a global phenomenon. It happens in the United States, and I think for me, the biggest, the most important issue or distinction here, or issue, is the distinction between an editorial column which perhaps supports a particular candidate versus if that is featured as a news story, then we have a problem. If it's featured as an editorial, all right, that's the editorial board's decision, but it must be clearly, you know, seen as an editorial or opinion piece, not a news story.
Pak kalau editorial, Pak. Sampun nggih, Pak Wisnu? Okay, nanti lanjut di luar, Pak. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for having us today. Give a round of applause to our panelists, Bapak Rauli Virtanen, Wojciech Tohman, Ms. Michelle Betts, and Monica Blanco. Thank you all for sharing with us. I now hand over to...
Who is responsible for temperature here?
Who is responsible for temperature? We're cold. Thank you.
That's a good one.
Oh, take photos, please. Don't leave yet.
It's an honor being here with you.
That was awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Right.
When do you head home?
Next Monday.
Oh, you're here for a while.
Yes.
For you.
Yeah, I'm going to Bali tomorrow.
Will you take me with you?
I'll be glad if you join us.
4 days, I'm just in Seoul. I'm just in Seoul from the first airport.